When you have kids, one of the things that you don't realize is going to happen is you end up watching a bunch of movies that you would otherwise never watch, ever. Nobody tells you about this, you never think about it, but for the past 14 years, I have watched a bunch of movies that I would have never watched if I didn't have kids. So what's happened is I've developed this very strong opinions about what makes a good kids movie. So obviously, first of all, the kids have to enjoy the movie, right? You want the kids to enjoy the movie. But I have a specific way of defining that. They have to enjoy it enough to not fight during the movie. So that's actually how I define it. Because sometimes you as a kid later, oh, I love the movie. They weren't paying attention, or they were fighting with their sibling the whole time, but they'll still tell you they loved it. Nope, you have to be so engrossed that you don't fight with your siblings during it. So that's part of my definition. But the other part of my definition is that I, as an adult, have to actually enjoy the movie. I think part of a good kids movie is that the adults enjoy it as well. And what I really like, and this is just a personal thing, I like it when there's subtle things that happen that fly over the kids' heads, the jokes that the kids don't get but the adults do get. Those are my favorite. So Shrek did this perfectly. If you've ever watched any of the Shrek movies, where there's jokes that the kids are laughing at, but then the adults are like, did they just? Oh my gosh, yes they did. Those are the kind of jokes that I love. So I love it when there's that subtle flying over the kids' heads truth and jokes. So one of the movies that did this surprisingly well was the Lego Movie. Do you remember the Lego Movie? No, Lego Movie came out 10 years ago, and since then 20 more have come out. But I'm talking about the very, very first one, which was outrageous, and it was silly, but it was kind of deep all at the same time. Now, if you don't remember the movie, you'll probably remember the song that came out of the movie. Everything is awesome. Remember that? It was just, and it kind of gets in your head a little bit. Now, that song was crazy. We would play it for you right now, but the stream would take our stream down, and then it would be in your head for the rest of the day. So you're welcome for not doing that right now. But what I want to do is I want to read some of the lyrics to you here. So yes, it is a silly song that the kids will laugh at, and I played it for my 7-year-old was grumpy one morning going to school this week, and I played it on the way to school, and by the time we got to school, he was laughing and giggling, and he's made me play it 20 more times. So it's actually a great little pro tip parent thing there. Play a silly song, sometimes it pulls your kids out of it. So it is silly, but I think it works on a deeper level. So let me read some of this to you, and then I'll explain what I mean. Have you heard the news? Everyone's talking. Life is good because everything's awesome. I lost my job. There's a new opportunity. More free time with my awesome community. Stepped in mud, got new brown shoes. It's awesome to win, and it's awesome to lose. And then he just starts going. Blue skies, bouncy springs, we just named 2 awesome things. Nobel Prize, piece of string. You know what's awesome? Everything. Trees, frogs, clogs, they're awesome. Rocks, clocks, socks, they're awesome. Figs, jigs, twigs, that's awesome. Everything you see or think or say is awesome. Now, okay, it's over the top, right? A little cloying, a little too much. Now, the reason I think this song is awesome is because there's actually more there than first appears. It's certainly silly, and the kids definitely laugh at all of the just nonsensical things that are said, but it's actually deep. They're not just trying to be nonsensical. They're not just trying to be silly. This song, get ready for the sentence, this song is a satirical critique of positivity culture. It's sarcastically pointing out how absurd it is to say that everything's awesome when obviously not everything is awesome. It's poking fun at the extreme optimist. People who refuse to acknowledge reality by being stubbornly, absurdly, over-the-top positive. And I appreciate their subtle dig at the crazy optimist over here, which leads to our series today. So we're in a series called Cliche, where we're looking at a partial truth is a whole problem. And the reason we've been looking at cliches is because I believe a lot of people in our culture have taken these cliches as life principles. And they're adopting these cliches as if they are absolute truth, like Bible verses for their life, without question. And I think that's a little dangerous because a lot of these cliches, while they have truth, they also have some subtle lies built into them. So the cliche we're looking at today, I believe, inspired the song, Everything is Awesome. It is, in my opinion, one of the most annoying things that someone can say to you, especially in the context under which it is normally said. The cliche we're looking at today is, just look on the bright side. just look on the bright side. Stepped in mud, got new brown shoes, right? That's my favorite line in that movie, or in that song. I don't know about you. I find this one particularly annoying. So I'm going to tell you something about me that you're not allowed to think less of me for, because I just said that, so now you're not allowed. I get really annoyed when people try to cheer me up. Really annoyed. And I know, like, the logical part of my brain knows that doesn't make any sense. Like, because if somebody loves you enough and cares about you enough in the moment to try and pull you out of a dark spot, like, that's a good thing, right? For somebody to say, hey, let me try to, cheer you up here. Like, I know that's good, and it comes from a good place, and I understand all that, and I hate it anyways. I hate it anyways. And I was trying to figure out why. Part of it is just a little bit of me thing, like it's my rebellious nature. If you tell me to look left, I want to look right. Like, that's a little bit. So if you tell me things aren't as bad as I think, I'm going to actually find more reasons why it's worse than I think. Like, I'm just going to kind of go the opposite direction. But then there's another darker reason, and I'm afraid to tell you this because I'm afraid you'll never try to cheer me up ever again. So if in your attempts to cheer me up includes something along the lines of, it's not as bad as you think it is, I'm going to immediately think you're stupid. Because I'm like, no, I am an expert in how bad this situation is. And if you think I'm not seeing something, I definitely think you're not seeing something. And here's what happens. Here's the real bad part. If you try to cheer me up, I don't just reject that. I'm going to try and uncheer you up. I'm going to pull you down. I'm going to convince you that you shouldn't be as happy as you are. You should be down here with me. Okay, so I understand this is a character flaw. Jesus is still working on this. But that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm really good at defending myself against being cheered up and then maybe pulling you down with me. And part of this, though, is it comes from this idea that the optimist, the person who like only wants to see the bright side of things, is actually refusing to see the whole picture. It's this idea that they're actually seeing less of reality by looking on the bright side. So I want to quote two great works of art. The first one is The Princess Bride. Absolute epic. Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you differently is selling something. Remember that line, Wesley, the dread pirate Roberts? Now, life is pain. That is an exaggeration, right? That's out there. But think about this. What if I made you pick between everything is awesome, being real, or life is pain? Which one is more true? If you say everything is awesome, I think you're blind. I think it is more true to say that life is pain than it is to say that everything is awesome. So the second great work of art that I would like to quote is Captain America: Winter Soldier. Sneaky good Marvel movie. If you've not seen it, it's better than anything they're coming out with lately. Here's the quote. "We take the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be. And it's getting dang near past time for you to get with a program, Cap." So it's Nick Fury. He didn't say dang, by the way, because it's Nick Fury. But he's talking to Captain America, who tends to be kind of the optimist, who tends to be kind of the idealist. And Nick Fury is saying, no, we take the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be. We're not narrowing our view. We're not choosing to see less of the world. We're taking it as it is. We're living in reality. And that appeals to me. I don't want to live in some false pretend butterflies and rainbows, everything is awesome even though it isn't world. I'm too much of a realist for that. I don't want to have to lie to myself. So for me, the real problem with look on the bright side as advice is that it's asking me to be dumber than I really am. It's asking me to see less. And in that, a lot of times when it's said, and can we be honest here, when it's said, just look on the bright side, it fails to acknowledge like the pain and the suffering and the trauma that has happened to the person that you're saying it to. So I've come to the conclusion that look on the bright side works for the small stuff. You can say this to the small stuff. So I give you full permission, like you needed it, to say this to the small stuff. So if it rains on a beach vacation, Look on the bright side. You got a day inside, you can heal up the sunburn, play some board games, look on the bright side. Got it, check, awesome, totally makes sense. Or in the church context, if you're running a small group and not as many people show up as you'd wanted it to, look on the bright side. Maybe some people who don't normally talk will talk, and maybe the conversation will be way deeper because there's not as many people. Look on the bright side. Got it, yes. I agree with it. When it comes to the little things, go ahead. Look on the bright side. But for me, look on the bright side starts to unravel when we try to apply it to the bigger things. It falls short when it comes to stuff like abuse or trauma or chronic illness or the death of a loved one. This little phrase sounds so hollow. I mean, if the words "look on the bright side" come out of your mouth at a funeral, you deserve to be punched in the throat, right? Like that should never happen. You should never say that. That is crazy, right? Don't you dare come at me with some happy, plucky attitude when I'm going through something dark. It's the same as saying get out a telescope on a cloudy, overcast night. You're saying there's light somewhere. Yeah, sure, there's light somewhere, but I don't have access to it in the moment that I'm in. I can't see it in the moment that I'm in. So look on the bright side doesn't work in the darkest moments. It's terrible advice to give somebody, and it's terrible advice to receive. It feels shallow. It feels insensitive. Now, this leads to a question, though. Because if look on the bright side is not great advice when we're facing the toughest things of life, well then, what is? What is good advice? Because I don't want to live in a false reality where I just live in denial of all this stuff and I just say, everything is awesome, and I'm just gritting my teeth and saying it and closing my eyes because I don't want to look around. But at the same time, I also don't want to be the person over here who only sees the dark sides of life either, right? You don't want to swing the pendulum all the way over to the other side to the extreme pessimist. You don't want to be Eeyore, right? You don't want to find a cloud on a clear day. You don't want to be that kind of a person either. So I don't want to be everything is awesome, and I don't want to be everything is terrible, because both of these require me to see less, right? Everything is awesome, look on the bright side, refuses to see the dark things of life, and then everything is terrible, I hate this, refuses to see the light. So both are seeing less, and I don't want to do that. So, what should we do? There's some wisdom we can find in the Bible for this. The Bible has some things to say about this. I think there's a third option. We don't have to see less. Both of these are missing something. So we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, a couple of verses, just a couple. If you're curious, we're going to use a little different translation this morning. We're going to use the NASB, New American Standard Version. We usually use the NLT because it's super easy to read, and I definitely suggest that one if you're newer to the Bible. NLT works, NIV sometimes as well. But we're going to use NASB today. It's a little more precise, and it allows some of the poetry to come through that's written into some of these things, and I really think it's important for these couple of verses. So if you cared, there's my little side note. 2 Corinthians 4:17 starts like this. We're just going to look at the first couple of words. For momentary light affliction. Momentary light affliction. Paul, who's writing this, is talking about what you're going through. He's talking about your problems. He's talking about your pain. He's talking about your suffering. He's talking about your trauma. He's talking about your depression. He's talking about your anxiety. And Paul just said all that, whatever you're going through, the whole thing, all the pain, all of that, is momentary and light. And I want to say for you, I am offended. I can't believe he would talk about that like that, right? That sounds really insensitive. It sounds a whole lot like look on the bright side. It sounds a whole lot like everything is awesome. But Paul's doing something here. He's going to make a comparison. Now, there's a bad way to make a comparison. Have you ever had somebody try to cheer you up by comparing what you're going through with some other worse thing that someone else is going through? You ever had somebody try to do that before? Like, hey, I know you lost your job, but at least you don't have cancer. Like that's supposed to be like, oh yeah, okay, now I'm happy. Like that's gonna do something. It doesn't work, does it? Like there's a logic behind it, and like I understand that there's some things I should be grateful that I'm not going through, but this is still real to me, right? It doesn't seem to work. So that's a comparison that doesn't work, but Paul's going for something a little deeper here. Momentary and light affliction. Because at first, sounds like stepped in mud, got new brown shoes. Like, what are you doing here, Paul? Like, you could include this as a line in the song. It doesn't rhyme, but I feel like he could pull it off. He's going somewhere, though. So he continues, verse 17, for momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison. So here's his comparison. He's not comparing your life to someone else's life. He's not comparing your trouble to someone else's trouble. He's not comparing your pain to someone else's pain, your trauma to someone else's trauma. He's not doing that. He's comparing everything you're going through in this life with what you're going to experience in the next life. That's Paul's comparison. The pain you experience in this life and the glory you'll experience in the next life. And it's meant to be a bit of a poetic comparison here. He's comparing the momentary to the eternal. He's comparing this light affliction to the weight of glory. He wants you to put these things on a scale and compare them. And he's saying it in a way that's almost supposed to be sarcastic. He's almost poking fun at us a little bit. By calling whatever you're going through, oh yeah, that light and momentary affliction. He's almost trying to get you to be like, hey, wait, what? What are you saying? Because he wants you to lean into this and then compare it to this other thing. And you might think, hold on, are you sure? Like, is he just talking about the little things? Is he just talking about, I got stuck at a red light on my way to work and I was late, this light momentary affliction. Is he talking about stuff like that? I would say no. I would say that Paul's talking about the worst of life when he calls it light and momentary. Because think about it. Like what the Christians went through back then was way harder than the stuff that we go through. I mean, back then Christians, man, they could be killed for their faith. Matter of fact, they would die in horrible ways. They'd put them in the Colosseum and put wild animals in there and let them go to work while people clapped, and that was their movie, right? They didn't watch the Lego movie. They watched Christians be eaten by lions. That was their entertainment. So here's the thing. I actually believe that Paul would say this. Paul would say this to someone waiting in line to walk into the Colosseum. I think Paul would walk up to them and be like, hey. This light, momentary affliction, lion growling in the distance. That can't compare with the eternal weight of glory. And it actually works in that scenario. For Paul to say that to somebody who's about to die, there's a depth to that. Because he wouldn't say, hey, buddy, come here. You're in chains, waiting to be eaten by a lion. Hey, just look on the bright side, right? That doesn't work at all. That makes you kind of want to explode. Like, hey, why don't you come in here with me, right? Like you wouldn't want that kind of advice. But if you hear Paul say, hey, this light and momentary affliction, compared to the eternal weight of glory, what you're about to experience, that would do something else inside your soul. It has the opposite effect. All of a sudden, you're going to stand up a little straight and you're like, you know what, you're right. This is light, this is momentary compared to what I'm about to experience. So you can feel this difference in what Paul's trying to get us to when we face the dark things in our life. He's got a different look, a different feel. He calls what you're going through momentary because he's comparing it to eternal, which means everything you experience compared to eternity is momentary. Everything. Even the worst things, even a chronic illness, even a financial situation that never gets better, even a terminal diagnosis, the death of a loved one, all of that is momentary compared to eternity. And he calls it light. All of this stuff that seems unbearably heavy, he's like, yeah, but compared to the glory that is to be revealed, compared to the joy and the goodness that God has waiting for us, if you put them on a scale, Paul's like, go ahead, do it. Compare the two. What you're going through is nothing compared to what God has in store for you. All of your life's pain, all of your trauma, all of the suffering and all of the bad in your life, is like a drop in the ocean of what God is going to do in eternity. Paul wants you to compare it. And there's a depth to that. Eternal weight of glory. Ionios baros doxa. There's supposed to be a heaviness even to the phrase. It's supposed to kind of land compared to light and momentary affliction, eternal weight of glory. He wants you to see these things. He's intentionally wanting you to make this comparison, and I think it's really important. Look on the bright side. Sounds so shallow, but there is a Christian version of that. There's a Christian version of look on the bright side. And I want to be careful how I talk about this, because you've probably given this advice before, and there's a way you can give it that's right, and there's a way you can give it that's wrong. So we're gonna recognize nuance. I trust that you guys are advanced. We can recognize nuance. We're not just gonna operate like children in black and white, right? Okay, so we can recognize nuance. Good. I'm happy you're with me. So the Christian version of look on the bright side is, well, God works all things out for the good. God works all things out for the good. And it's said in just as flippant of a way as look on the bright side. But here's my disclaimer, here's my little asterisk, read the fine print. I agree that God works all things out for the good because it's a Bible verse. I don't know if you know, they're quoting Romans 8:28, and the verse is, for God works all things out for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It is a Bible verse, and I 100% agree that it is true. It's the way it's shared and the perspective that people have on it that I don't like. See if I can explain the shallow nature in which people say this. Most of the time when people say that God's gonna work it out for the good, they mean in this life and in a very tangible and real way that you're gonna be able to recognize. And it's oversimplified. For me, it's like 1 + 1 is 2. For example, oh, you got a flat tire? Well, that's because God was protecting you from a car accident on the way to work, right? God's work all things out for the good. That must have been it, right? Oh, you had to call off work because you were hugging the toilet? Yeah, that sucks, but maybe God was protecting you from some conversation that would have totally ruined your career later that day, so that was a good thing. Like, they try to make it into this then this kind of an obvious, shallow, it's gonna be super, once you see what God's going to do, you're gonna see the obvious reason behind it. Because everybody wants an answer to the question why, right? You always want an answer. I'm going through this why. Why did God let me get a flat tire? Well, you wanna come up with something that's obvious and you can see it. But listen, I have 2 problems with that. One, what a silly way to look at God. This all-powerful, all-knowing being watching you drive towards an accident, and God's like, I don't know what to do. They're gonna pop. Like, that's all I could come up with. like that's all he could come up, like he couldn't come up with anything better. Like, oh, they're gonna have this horrible conversation at work, and it's gonna ruin their career. Virus. Like, that's all, like, God's just not that smart. In that version, I'm just like, I feel like you're making God kind of a buffoon there. I wanna believe that he's got a little more foresight than that. He's a little more wise than that. That just makes him stupid. So that's my first problem with it. But secondly, the way it's used, and again, it's not a bad thing to say. It depends on how you say it. The way it's used, it's almost like God is going to work all things out for the good in this world and in this life. It's like contained. Like, you want to see it happen in an obvious way. You want to make this connection between the bad thing and the good thing, and you want it to be super obvious. You're going to say, oh, that's why God did it. But there are 2 deeper ways this works out that we fail to acknowledge. One, what if God allows a bad thing to happen in your life to do a good thing in your heart? What if God allows some bad stuff to happen out here because he's trying to do something good in here? So you keep asking why, and you want the answer to be out here. He allowed a bad here, and I want an equally opposite, maybe a little bit better good here. I lost this money so I could gain this money. You want it to be obvious. But what if God's like, no, I didn't have you lose your job so you could get a better one. I had you lose your job because I want to do something in your heart, in your soul. What if one of God's tools to do surgery on your soul is pain? and the good is in here. See, that's a little harder. And what you're being asked, Christian, what you're being asked is to say that I care more about the good God's doing in me than the bad that's happening to me. And that's what you're being asked, to have the faith that whatever bad out here, there's some kind of good he wants to do in here. And that requires some faith, doesn't it? That requires I believe that God is good and that whatever he's doing out here, he's doing something in here with it. That requires you to lean into it and to actually value soul work over bad circumstances. It's not easy. It's not easy. Now, we're already part way down the rabbit hole. Let's keep going. The second thing we fail to realize about this, God working all things out for the good, is that God's plan is bigger than your life. And this is even crazier because it's not just that he might be working something out in your soul, he might be working something out in eternity. Listen, God's plan is bigger than your 70, 80, 90 years on this earth. Do you acknowledge that? That, hey, whatever, and maybe that's even giving you some. We don't know how long you're going to live, right? Whatever your lifespan is, God's plan is bigger than that. He's got a wider lens than we have. We see a tiny sliver of a sliver of a sliver of what God is doing on this earth, and we act like everything has to make sense right here. And God's like, no, I'm doing this though. And in this little sliver, it might not make sense. So Martin Luther King Jr. said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I love that quote. So what he's saying is that even when things skew away from what we believe to be right and true, it will eventually curve back and land on right and true. But we don't, sometimes we live here and you're like, my life is not looking the way it's supposed to look. It's not feeling the way it's supposed to feel. This bad thing happened, this horrible thing happened, this life-changing thing happened, and it's skewing away from what is right and good and true. And you're like, I want God to land it. Bring it back to right and good and true, God. Well, listen, he will. I believe in a God who will right all wrongs. But this curve, it's a long one. And here's the thing, it is going to land eventually, but you could die back here. You might not see it land. You might live in this messy middle, this in-between spot where everything goes wrong and you don't get to see the resolution yet. Because God's plan is bigger than us. He's not confined to our lifespan. And I just want to say, that's a sentence we can all at least logically agree with, right? For God to have a plan that's bigger than your lifespan, I think we're like, of course he does, right? Of course he does. I hope he does. Still not easy to swallow. So this good that God will work out, it might be in your soul, so you might not see it. You might not see it in some obvious way. It might be right in here. So instead of asking why, which is a totally valid and okay question, ask it. But you might want to shift into what? What are you doing in here? What are you doing in here? Not to say that why is wrong, but I think you'll get a lot further with what. And then you might just have to pray and say, all right, Lord, what? Help me absorb that this might not resolve this side of heaven. Help me absorb that this curve will land eventually, but I might not see it land. And help me have that faith in those tough moments. You might be working out in your soul or in eternity. So light, momentary affliction, eternal weight of glory, physical, spiritual. So here's Paul's advice. Here's what Paul would tell you. In verse 18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, and the things which are not seen are eternal. So here's the part of the cliche, just look on the bright side, that I actually appreciate. Built into that cliche is the assumption that you have a choice of what you're going to focus on. That you can actually focus on one thing or another thing, that you have the autonomy as a human being to say, I will either look at this or I will look at this. It's built in, and I like that. I agree with it, and Paul agrees with it. Because he's telling you here, you have a choice as to what you're going to focus on in this life. But it's not, you can either look at the bright side or the dark side. Either the glass is half empty or it's half full. He's not saying that. Paul's saying, hey, you have a choice to look at things that are temporal or things that are eternal. Things that are physical or things that are spiritual. He wants you to flip and choose to see the eternal, to see the spiritual in the things that you're experiencing. So he's actually saying you have two sets of eyes. You have cones and rods and corrective lenses and all that, and you can see in the physical, but you also have a whole nother set of eyes, and you can see in the spiritual. You can see in the eternal. And what he's actually saying is that you can see better with your eyes closed. These ones. Close your physical eyes, open your eternal eyes. So for me, look on the bright side doesn't work. It unravels with the big things. How about look on the eternal side? See past it. Don't compare your pain to someone else's pain. Compare your temporary pain to eternal joy. Do that comparison. Do that math. And for me, here's the big difference, and I hope you see that, I hope it's obvious the difference, because maybe you're like, well, that sounds just as trite and flippant. Look on the bright side, look on the eternal side, and you could hear it that way, but there's a huge difference. Because look on the bright side is asking you to reduce your cone of vision and only see the positive in life. But when I say look on the eternal side, it's actually asking you to see more than you would normally see. This is an invitation to more sight. Instead of dumbing yourself down, you're actually lifting yourself up. You're trying to see more. It's not just this physical world that I'm living in. I also want to see on a whole nother level. I want to see the spiritual thing that God's doing in my soul. I want to see the spiritual thing that God's doing in eternity. I want to see more, not less. So for me, this is exciting. I'm not being asked to be an idiot on purpose. I'm being asked to actually see more. And I want that. I hope you want that. Now, it's a heavy thing to see in both worlds. And I want you to know this. It's a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, to see with eternal eyes, to see with spiritual eyes, is to say that, hey, there's a whole nother reality, that God is up to something that I can't see, and I trust that he's gonna make it good even if it's in eternity, and I believe that God is doing something good, and it's comforting. But there's another side of seeing in the spiritual that can actually make your pain a little sharper, and let me explain. As a Christian, we believe that God created the world good. He created the world good. In its original form, when God created Adam and Eve and the whole earth and all the stuff, he said it was good. So what we believe is that the human soul and body was created for a world that did not include pain and suffering and death. We weren't created to experience this. So when we have those things happen to us, we're not gonna lie to ourselves and say, well, that's just a part of life. And even when the worst happens, it's one of my biggest pet peeves when people, if somebody close to you dies and somebody comes up to you and says, well, death is just a part of life. Again, in an attempt to comfort you, in an attempt to normalize pain and suffering and death, they're trying to say, well, this is just a thing we all experience as humans. If you're a Christian, you're going to reject that. You're going to say, no, it isn't actually. It was never intended to be a part of our life. It was never intended to be a part of our experience. The reason this stuff is heavy is because your soul wasn't created to experience this. But for me, this is also, I kind of use this as one of my more morbid proofs for God. Anytime somebody finds out that a loved one has passed away unexpectedly, their knee-jerk immediate reaction is always, no. They reject it. They deny it. Think back. If you've ever gotten that news before, what was the first thing out of your mouth? No. It can't be. You reject it. It's called denial, right? Even scientists, anybody would acknowledge this is our soul's reaction to these things happening. And what I'm saying is, well, the reason your soul reacts that way is because your soul was never created to experience it. So your soul's like, that can't be true. That can't be real. Because your soul it says, no, I wasn't created to experience that kind of separation. That can't be real. So we're going to feel this on a little bit deeper of a level. You're going to feel life's pain and suffering on a little bit deeper of a level because you're going to acknowledge this is not what I was created to experience. So you're not going to deny it. You're not going to dumb yourself down. You're not going to close your eyes to the pain and the suffering. You're not going to lie to yourself and say it's normal. So it's going to hurt a little bit. But when you open up that spiritual set of eyes, you also get access to this eternal perspective. This hope. This hope that is put in something that cannot be taken from you. And that's a huge difference between somebody who's a Christian and somebody who's not. If you're not a Christian, you put all your hope in what's happening in this earth, every single thing that you have, that you put your hope on in this earth can be taken, can be destroyed, can die, can be destroyed. But for us as Christians, we have a hope that goes past this world, and it is unassailable. That means that the worst things can happen to you, the worst. There's a whole book of the Bible about it. It's called Job. If you've never read it, it's a little long, but it's about a guy who lost everything. His kids die, his wealth is taken from him, his health is taken from him. The only thing that God leaves is his wife. And the joke is that that's actually a part of the curse. She's awful. Because she is, in the story, she's awful. So he has everything go wrong. Everything go wrong. If he had put his hope in all those things, his life would have been destroyed, and he would have, his wife actually told him, curse God and die. You've got nothing left. Which is funny coming from her. What about you? Nothing. Okay. So he's in this state. But the difference between somebody who's put their hope in this world and somebody who has hope in the next one is that Job had this flicker of a flame that refused to go out. He knew that God had something in store for him. Even if he didn't experience it this side of heaven, he had a hope that was placed in a thing that could not be touched. He was invincible. And that's what we have access to, Christian. See, if Christians are optimistic or positive or whatever we are, it's not because we refuse to see the darkness in this world. No. I actually want to be the kind of Christian who has eyes wide open. I want to see all of it. Good, bad, bright, dark, all of it. And more. I don't just want to see the physical world. I also want to see the spiritual one. I want to be a person who lives a deep life with eyes open and experiences it all. But even with that bad and the pain and the suffering and all that, I have a hope that cannot be touched. I want to be that kind of a person. I want to be that kind of a church. When things hit, when stuff hits the fan, you're going to see with both sets of eyes. Don't close your eyes. Don't refuse to acknowledge it. Don't deny it. It's real. It hurts. But also see it with those spiritual eyes. Ask God, what are you doing in my soul? Ask God, what are you doing in eternity? Help me to trust you. Help me to trust you. As a Christian, you can acknowledge the reality of pain and suffering in your life and still hold on to a deep and unassailable hope. So let me read a couple verses here from the book of Revelation. It's towards the end. I don't understand a lot of what happens in Revelation, but I understand this. Revelation 21, 3-5. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever." And the one sitting on the throne said, "Look, I'm making everything new." I love every bit of it. The first verse where it's emphasizing in a repetitive way that God's going to be with us. There's not going to be any more distance between us and God. That when we die and when God ends this whole thing and fixes this whole thing, that we now have nothing between us and God. We get to experience the fullness of his presence. And the consequences of this are that there are no more tears, no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. All bad things become untrue in his presence. And then I love verse 5. He's just so excited himself that God himself is like, hey, look, I'm making everything new. And that's the hope we have. That's the deep hope we have. As a Christian, you trust in Jesus, you see what he did for you, and you have that coming. A relationship with God and a future eternal hope. Way deeper than just look on the bright side. Pray with me. Lord, I pray for the person who's going through it right now, that they feel pain very keenly, the sharpness of it, the ache. Lord, I pray that you'd just be with them in that right now. I pray that shallow advice to look on the bright side would just fall off, Lord, and that they would look on the eternal side, that they would open up those spiritual eyes and see that you're doing something deeper. I pray that they would have the courage to ask, what are you doing in my heart? I pray that they would have the faith to trust that you're doing something in eternity. That they would lean into you and not push away from you. That they could say with Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That they could say that in truth. I pray that would be our instinct, Lord. I pray that this church would be a church full of people with an unassailable hope, a depth to us, an invincibility when life hits, because we know we've got you and we've got eternity. And that these afflictions that we have would feel light and momentary compared to the eternal weight of glory that you have waiting for us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.